What really happened inside sealed Egyptian tombs? When an Egyptian tomb was sealed, it did not mark the end of a life. It marked the beginning of a process. For the ancient Egyptians, death was not disappearance. It was a transition into another form of existence, a journey, long, uncertain, and dangerous. But unlike what many people imagine, this journey did not begin after death. It began before the final breath. Every detail of life, every choice, every action was, in a way, preparation for what would come next. And everything that happened inside the tomb was designed to ensure that this transition could succeed. Nothing there was symbolic, it was functional. The tomb was not just a resting place, it was a system, an environment carefully constructed to sustain the continuity of existence. And that system began with the body. The ancient Egyptians believed that life after death depended directly on physical preservation. The body was not just a container, it was an anchor. If it was destroyed, identity would be lost with it. That is why they developed mummification, a process that was not only technical, but deeply strategic. The body was opened with precision. Nothing was done impulsively. Each step followed knowledge built over generations. Internal organs were removed and preserved separately. Each organ had a role. Every detail had a purpose. The brain was discarded. To them, it was not essential. The heart remained. Because within their worldview, the heart was the center of consciousness, of memory, and of judgment. It carried the essence of who that person truly was. After that, the body was dehydrated using natural salts. No water, no decomposition, but this was not only about preventing decay. It was about interrupting time, creating a pause, a suspension between life and whatever came after. This process took days, sometimes weeks. Nothing was rushed, because any mistake would compromise everything. Once the body was stable, reconstruction began. Layers of linen wrapped the body, not only to protect it, but to preserve its form, its visual identity. Between those layers, amulets were placed, small objects with very specific functions. Protection against unknown forces, guidance through the journey, defense against anything that could prevent continuation. Nothing was random. Every element had a clear purpose within that system. When the process was complete, the body was placed inside the tomb. And this is where things become even more intriguing, because the tomb was not empty, it was an extension of life. Inside, they placed food, clothing, tools, and personal belongings, not as symbols, but as resources, because to them, existence continued, and if it continued, so did its needs, to eat, to dress, to survive. All of it still mattered. In addition, statues represented servants, but they were not decorative. They were substitutes. If something failed, these figures could take on roles in the next existence, a form of redundancy, a backup system. But the most important element was not physical. It was the texts, carved into the walls. These texts functioned as guides. They were not stories. They were not records. They were instructions, direct, precise, almost like a manual. Because in this belief system, death did not lead to an immediate destination. It led to a path, and that path had stages. The deceased had to cross unknown regions, spaces that did not follow the rules of the physical world. They had to face entities, figures that questioned, tested, blocked the way. And they had to answer challenges. Each step required knowledge. Knowing what to say, knowing how to act, knowing when to speak, and when to remain silent. Without that knowledge, the journey failed, and failure meant disappearance. At the end of this path, there was a judgment, the most decisive moment. The heart was placed on a scale. On the other side, a feather. Not a symbol, a measure. If the heart was heavier, burdened by negative actions, everything ended there. No continuation, no return. But if it remained in balance, the journey continued, and existence went on. That was the purpose of everything. Every detail inside the tomb, every step of preparation pointed to that moment. Once everything was ready, the tomb was sealed, with no intention of reopening, not to hide, but to preserve. Total isolation. For centuries, it remained untouched. Operating within the logic it was designed for, until the tombs began to be opened. Explorers, archaeologists, looters, each with their own motive. And that is when strange reports began to appear. Unexpected illnesses, unusual deaths, sensations that were difficult to explain, spaces that felt wrong. Some called it a curse. But there is a simpler interpretation. These tombs were designed as closed systems, isolated environments, balanced. Any external interference breaks that balance. And when that happens, something is lost. And maybe that is the most important point. What existed inside those tombs was not just a preserved body. It was an attempt, highly elaborate, to control what happens after death, an engineering of eternity. Something designed to function without interruption, and that raises an inevitable question. If everything was built to ensure continuity, why seal it so deeply? Perhaps because the process was never meant to be interrupted, or perhaps because it was never meant to be observed. And if that is true, then opening those tombs was not just a discovery, it was an interruption of something that, for thousands of years, worked exactly as intended.